Just 1 second as it's loading. We are good.
Okay, great. Well, good morning, everyone, members of the committee, members of the public. We thank you for joining us this morning for the November 15th meeting of the Joint Audits and Evaluation Committee. Since we last met, have a new co-chair. I'd like to welcome Delegate Mark Chang as the new Vice Chair of House Appropriations and also the new co-chair for this committee. So welcome, Delegate Chang. I know we have a busy agenda this morning, and before we get started, I want to see if Delegate Chang has anything he would like to add or comment on as the new Vice Chair. Or sorry, as the new Chair of the committee. Co-chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and thanks to all the agencies who are here and all the members. I appreciate your time and look forward to having questions and presentations. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Chairman Chang. I think the members of the committee have an agenda that is before you. I think that's also been shared with the public. We are going to take the agenda as it's displayed, and we're going to try to dispatch some of the audits that are smaller than the behavioral health audit first. Because we also potentially have to move into a closed session for the BHA audit. So we will take that subsequently. So we will start with the State Lottery and Gaming Control Agency. And there was an audit that was completed earlier this year with regards to the state lottery system. We have a few representatives from the Maryland Lottery and Gaming Control Agency, as well as the auditors who participate in this audit of the agency. I will start it off because I'm not sure that there are any slides for presentation from the Lottery and Gaming Control Agency. This really stemmed from an audit finding that was reported by OLA in their report that found that there were many winners who won multiple lottery tickets. And it shows that, in summary, there were, I think, about 360 different players who won 20 or more times for some of these lotteries. And there were 8 of them who won 200 or more times, I think totaling almost $4.5 million. And so I think our inquiry is really to have a better understanding here of how there could be so many multiple winners of some of these lottery tickets. I think the agency has some findings they would like to share as well, and maybe we can begin there. So I'll turn it over to the Director of the Lottery and Gaming Agency, John Martin.
Thank you, Senator Lamb. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you here this morning. Again, my name is John Martin. I'm the Director of Maryland Lottery and Gaming Control Agency, and I'm here today to provide an update on our corrective actions in line with finding 1 and recommendation 1 of the March 2022 OLA report. With me today, somewhere on your screen, is our team: Jim Nielsen, Deputy Director and Chief Operating Officer; James Butler, Assistant Deputy Director and Chief of Staff; Paula Yoakum, Chief Financial Officer; and Charles Lucky, Internal Auditor, and they'll provide assistance. I'd like to begin by rephrasing or paraphrasing the question. The use of the word winning in the audit and subsequent media reports truly mischaracterizes the matter. The issue that has garnered attention has to do with excessive cashing activity, not people winning multiple times, although that can and does happen frequently, as I'll detail in a moment. More accurately, people redeemed multiple winning tickets that they themselves may not have purchased. All lottery tickets proceed through the same transparent process: purchasing, winning, ideally, and cashing. Transactions occur across all 3 phases thousands of times during a day. The lottery sells games of chance to generate funding for a variety of state programs, including public health and safety, education, and the environment. In fiscal 2021, MLGCA program has generated over $1.5 billion for the state, the 4th highest source of state revenue Of that total, $673.7 million came from the lottery. Players purchased two types of lottery games, scratch-off tickets and draw game tickets, at over 4,400 retail locations across the state. Scratch-off tickets are cards sold at a price ranging from $1 to $30 that feature a latex coating. The player scratches off the latex to reveal the play area and determines if it is a winning or non-winning ticket. Prices range from $1 up to millions of dollars. Draw game tickets, in comparison, are priced from 50 cents on up based on the number of games and frequency the player chooses. Prizes can range from $1 up to billions of dollars, as recent history has shown us. I want to be clear that nothing in the OLA finding had anything to do with the integrity of our lottery games. Our drawings are secure and the results are always random. The prizes won were legitimate and all were validated within our system. Again, the issue is about excessive caching activity, not repeat winners. What are some of the activities that may trigger excessive caching activity? Well, the first and obvious activity is when people play excessively. Some players who have the means may purchase a large number of tickets or play at increased dollar levels. One example is our daily pick 4 game, where a $1 wager can return $5,000 if your 4-digit number comes up in that exact order. A player may purchase 20 $1 tickets for numbers 1, 2, 3, 4. And if 1, 2, 3, 4 comes up, they have 20 winning tickets, each worth $5,000 for a total of $100,000 in prize winnings. With 2 pick 4 drawings daily, some players may win dozens of times throughout the year. And unfortunately, we also realize that some players who play excessively may not have the financial resources, despite our constant messaging to play responsibly. Purchasing a lottery ticket is an anonymous transaction. As long as a player is 18 years of age, they may purchase a ticket. We believe in many of the instances cited by the OLA, a scheme known as discounting is occurring, wherein the actual purchaser of a winning ticket is allowing the ticket to be claimed by another individual who has paid a fee for their services. After conducting a number of interviews, we believe that several of the frequent winners identified are the actual ticket purchases. However, we also believe that some actual purchasers are discounting. There are many reasons a winner may choose to do this. When claimed, the winnings over $600 are reported as taxable income of the individual making the claim. The claimant must provide photo identification, driver's license in most instances, and proof of their Social Security number. Our normal caching procedure for prices of $600 or more includes an automated review of the claimant's personal information against the database of state obligations, which are primarily back taxes, criminal restitution, and child support, to see if they owe any money to the state. As a state agency, we are obligated to intercept these prizes for several state agencies like Maryland Department of Human Services, and the Central Collections Unit. Other purchasers engage in this fraudulent activity in an effort to avoid their tax obligations, while others want to avoid potentially a spouse finding out about their prize winnings. To avoid paying the state debt, some purchasers may seek an individual to claim the ticket on their behalf in exchange for a discounted prize. For example, a $5,000 prize that may have been offset by a $2,500 tax bill now becomes a discounted prize of $4,000 to the original purchaser, with the individual actually claiming the ticket taking his cut of $1,000. The state debt is still unpaid, but the prize has been claimed and the report for income tax purposes and the Social Security number of the individual who claimed the winning ticket. Discounting is not unique to Maryland. Every state that operates a lottery has the very same issue. Individuals who provide this service may make themselves known in the community. It is their name that continues to show up on the, quote, winners list. Avoiding debts like back taxes and child support is unethical and illegal. Our agency is not a criminal enforcement agency, and we have no police powers. There's nothing in our statute that would allow us to refuse payment to these claimants, although we have delayed some in order to conduct our own investigations. If we find enough evidence against an individual or individuals, we pass that information on to the proper authorities. In February of this year, 2022, we began implementing a software analytics solution to review and identify claims made by individuals that appear excessive or unusual. This helps us in identifying potential discounting activities in the marketplace for investigation by lottery staff. The reviews and investigations will continue using the analytical tools we have, with appropriate action taken against both claimants, individuals, and retailers. To the extent that certain retailers are aware of this practice, allowing it to happen, or are assisting in this fraudulent activity, we have taken action on that front as well. We are revoking retailer licenses with the hope that word of our enhanced reviews will spread. The Maryland Lottery and Gaming Control Agency will continue to investigate questionable practices like these, which unfortunately are not uncommon in this industry. We take the findings seriously, and while we can't go into the specifics of our analytics and investigatory practices in a public session, we can tell you that we have taken substantial action to monitor questionable caching activity. Thank you for your time and your interest in this important topic. At this time, we will entertain any questions that you may have.
All right, thank you, Mr. Martin, and thank you for clarifying the terminology there. So there's a distinction, obviously, between winning and caching, and I think that's an important distinction to have. There are questions from the committee. Anyone has questions, you can raise your virtual hand or raise your physical hand in the screen. Questions from the committee. All right, not seeing any questions. So I think you're off the hook, Mr. Martin. We appreciate the update, and it sounds like you have some work ahead. So we appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you for your interest and your time, Senator.
All right, so we will proceed next to the following audit, which is the audit of the Department of Human Services, the Family Investment Administration. For this audit, we will begin with our auditors in the Office of Legislative Audits, and we'll start with Mr. Hook, Chief Legislative Auditor.
Yes, thank you. I wish the lottery director was still here. I'd like to know if he'd investigate why I did not win the $1 billion prize, but that's a minor point. Maybe next time. Good morning, Senator Lamb, and a special welcome to Delegate Chang, our new House co-chair. If I may be so bold, congratulations on your appointment as co-chair to lead what OLA somewhat selfishly considers one of the premier legislative committees. For the record, I am Greg Hook, the legislative auditor, and I'd like to welcome new OLA employees who are viewing this meeting, which accounts for the large number of attendees. I also know we have a big agenda today, and as many of you know from past meetings, I can bore you with some long-winded introductions, but since we have such significant findings to share and discuss, I will keep my comments brief to allow more time for OLA staff to present. The first of two audit reports to be presented by OLA is the October 21st, 2022 Fiscal Compliance Report on the Department of Human Resources Family Investment Administration, or what we call FIA. Presenting the audit results will be Kathy Clark, Audit Manager, aided by Rob Smith, the Audit Senior, and Josh Adler, the Assistant Audit Director. This report contains 10 findings spread over 8 areas and includes 5 repeat findings. Of the 8 findings in the prior report, we determined that FIA satisfactorily corrected 3 items. During part of the audit, FIA and the recipients it serves via its temporary cash assistance services and federal supplemental nutrition assistance program were significantly impacted by COVID, which led to the modification of certain federal and state requirements, and these were taken into account during our audit. Also, in anticipation of heading off later questions from the committee, I have to mention that in November 2021, FIA fully implemented the Eligibility and Enrollment System, or E&E, a web-based application which replaced CARES. However, since CARES was the automated benefit system in effect during our audit period, our audit scope included CARES rather than the recently implemented E&E system. The E&E system will be subject to review during our next regularly scheduled audit. Some of the findings that Kathy will be highlighting include a repeat finding of recipients continuing to obtain temporary cash assistance beyond the period allowed by regulations, a lack of documentation supporting benefit eligibility determinations, 2 repeat findings on the lack of appropriate and timely follow-up of certain match results, including the failure to ensure that all Social Security numbers alerts were recorded in CARES for follow-up, and the need to obtain supporting documentation to support the grant awards awarded to a network of community and faith-based organizations, local departments of social services, and other state and local agencies were spent as intended. With that, I will turn it over to Kathy to present the results of the FIA audit.
Thank you, Greg. My name is Catherine Clark, and as Greg mentioned, I'm here with Josh Adler, Assistant Director, and Senior who performed the audit, Rob Smith. Throughout my presentation, for the sake of brevity, I am going to use a number of acronyms, including DHS for the Department of Human Services, FIA for the Family Investment Administration, TCA for Temporary Cash Assistance, SNAP for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, and finally LDSS for Local Departments of Social Services. As shown on slide 2, FIA is a unit of the DHS and oversees public assistance programs such as TCA, Home Energy Assistance, and SNAP. These programs are administered by the LDSSs, which FIA is required to supervise by state law. During fiscal year 2021, FIA issued payments to approximately 1.3 million monthly recipients, totaling approximately $2.3 billion. Our audit covers the period from May 1st, 2017 through May 31st, 2021, and we do have 10 findings in our report, 5 of which are repeats. The key findings in the report are located on slide 3. I will be discussing these findings in more detail. Proceeding to finding 1 of our report, which is on slide 4, we noted that FIA inadvertently disabled a critical system control resulting in SNAP benefits being awarded to applicants whose income exceeded the federally established income thresholds. This occurred in April of 2020, but was not identified until March 2021 when the new benefit system was being implemented. Our analysis identified that FIA issued benefits to more than 86,000 households out of more than 465,000 households with income in excess of the federally established income thresholds. Some of these 86,000 households may have been exempted from the income thresholds. However, FIA was not able to readily identify how many of those households qualified for the exemption. FIA advised that it does not intend on implementing any collection actions for payments made in error because it interprets a federal waiver as being a permanent waiver. However, FIA has no evidence that this waiver is permanent. Moving on to slide 5, which is finding 2, we noted that FIA allowed TCA recipients to continue receiving benefits beyond the 5-year limit established by federal and state law without evidence of a hardship exemption. As of May 2021, there were 3,273 recipients who were receiving TCA benefits beyond the 5-year period, which totaled approximately 2.1 million in benefits monthly. We tested 15 of these recipients and noted that 9 of these recipients did not have a documented hardship exemption. One of these recipients had received $150,000 in benefits over the 12 years, which exceeded the 5-year limit. We had a similar finding in our prior report, and in response to that report in March of 2019, DHS said that FIA was working with their computer developers to resolve this finding. However, as of September 2022, we were advised that the technological fix had not been implemented. Moving on to finding 3 on slide 6, we noted that FIA did not perform comprehensive quality assurance reviews of TCA cases to ensure that eligibility determinations and the related benefits were proper. Rather, FIA only documented improper payments that had been previously identified and corrected by the case manager. Proceeding to finding 4 on slide 7, we noted that FIA did not ensure that the LDSSs maintained application documentation to support eligibility determinations for their assistance programs. LDSSs must perform certain verifications per state regulation when processing an application, such as verifying a person's social security number. We tested SNAP, TCA, and TDAP cases, which were approved during fiscal years 2020 and 2021, and FIA could not provide us with a significant number of the requested documents. For example, we tested 60 TCA cases, and FIA did not have documentation for 26 social security number verifications and 22 income verifications. Proceeding to finding 5 on slide 8, we found that FIA did not always determine if TCA applicants received unemployment income. Federal regulations require a verification for unemployment income at the time of application and in each of the first 3 months that benefits are being received. These verifications are important because unemployment income may impact if a person is eligible for the TCA, and if so, how much they would receive. We tested 30 applications, and FIA could not document that it had performed unemployment income verifications for 15 TCA applications. And for the remaining 15, it could only document the initial unemployment income verification, but could not document the verifications for the subsequent 3 months benefits were received. We performed our own verification and found that 2 applicants had received unemployment income during that first 3 months of receiving TCA benefits. Moving to findings 6 and 7 on slide 9, which are both repeats from our prior report. In finding 6, we noted that FIA did not ensure that all alerts on social security numbers were recorded in the system for follow-up. These alerts are created when FIA recipients' social security numbers are matched against the Social Security Administration records and identify a missing or inaccurate piece of information. We reviewed the December 2021 match results and found that 188 out of 681 new match results did not create an alert in the CARE system for follow-up. FIA had no explanation for this. In finding 7, we found that FIA did not ensure the local departments of social services conducted timely and appropriate follow-up on alert, which resulted from comparisons of the beneficiaries' benefits and income in Maryland to benefits and income they were receiving in other states. For example, these alerts would note if a person was receiving SNAP in both Maryland and another state, which should not be happening. Our test of 46 alerts found that timely and or appropriate action had not been taken for 43 alerts. Moving to finding 8 on slide 10, which is about FIA's energy assistance programs, we found that FIA did not conduct monitoring reviews on local administering agencies as required by their policy. The local administering agencies process the applications and determine eligibility for energy assistance programs. FIA did not review 3 of the 20 local administering agencies, which accounted for approximately $40 million of $130 million in benefits issued in fiscal year 2021. And for 11 other local administering agencies, FIA did not review case files or issue a final report as required by its operations manual. Moving to finding 9 on slide 11, which is a repeat from our prior report, we noted that FIA did not adequately administer certain contracts and agreements. For example, FIA made significant modifications to the terms of a contract to assist TCA and TDAP recipients in obtaining federal benefits without formally determining the practicality or appropriateness of conducting a new procurement. For one invoice reviewed, this change resulted in a payment of $189,695, which would have been $1,698 under the original payment terms. The last finding that I'm going to discuss is finding 10 on slide 12, which relates to grants and has been noted in our last 4 audit reports going back to 2011. We found that FIA did not obtain supporting documentation to support that federal grants were spent as intended. FIA provided funding totaling $52 million over fiscal years 2020 and 2021 to various state, local agencies, LDSSs, and other organizations. Our test of 8 payments totaling $12.1 million to 4 grantees disclosed that FIA did not verify that grant funds were spent as intended for 5 payments made to 3 of these grantees, which totaled $2.1 million. This concludes my presentation for DHS FIA. Thank you for your interest, and I'm happy to take any questions.
All right. So we have questions for the auditors. I should mention, I neglected to mention at the top that we are joined by a few additional folks in addition to the standing members of the committee. We extended an invitation to the House Health and Government Operations Committee, as well as I think Senate Finance, and also the corresponding budget subcommittee. So we're joined by Chairperson Pena Melnick, Vice Chair Kelly, Chair Meredith Pendergrass. We also have the Health Services Subcommittee Chair, Delegate Resnick, as well. I see Delegate Resnick has a question.
I do. Thank you. And thank you for having me here. Thank you for that thorough audit. A couple quick questions. I wasn't keeping track. Could you tell me how many of those findings were repeat findings?
So happy.
5. Okay. Thank you, Josh. I appreciate it. So 5 out of 10 findings are repeat findings. Are they multiple year repeat findings, or is that
one of them was?
One of them was. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. Question in terms of being able to, or lack thereof, in terms of tracking the overpayments to recipients who are no longer eligible. Were you able to determine a cause for the lack of tracking of information and the poor paperwork? We just paid, and we're still paying, close to $600 million for the development of a new IT system that is actually supposed to track all of this stuff in real time and accurately. We've been developing that system over the last 7 years. You would think that after a $600 million investment, we'd be able to be better at this. Do we know where the shortcomings were in terms of tracking who is no longer eligible for those payments, and why those payments went out?
You're referring to finding 1, the one about where they messed up on the computer system, or finding 2 with the payments beyond the 5 years?
Yes.
Okay. So finding 1, there were a lot of people who got payments that their income exceeded the income thresholds by the federal government. Meaning, Daddy Warbucks could have gotten a benefit despite his income, because there was nothing stopping someone with a high income from getting the benefits for a period of time, over a year. So the department acknowledges this, but the department believes it's got nothing to do with systems. We could track it, we could figure out who the people are. The department believes that these people shouldn't have to pay any money back because there was a permanent waiver on overpayments. We don't believe the department has any basis for that, but that's the department's position. That's finding 1. Finding 2 is there's a program called temporary cash assistance, meaning temporary. And the department has allowed people to get these benefits for years and years without having a hardship exemption. A person can get an exemption if they have a problem such as abuse or something along those lines. But our audit found that even people without those exemptions are still getting the benefits. So it's not so much in whether a computer system could solve this problem. Yeah, a computer system could say, after 5 years, stop. You have to look at this and make sure that the person has a hardship exemption. Why the department hasn't implemented that, despite the fact they told us they were going to implement it several years ago? I think it's a good question for the department.
Well, Delegate Resnick, you're talking about Maryland Think, obviously.
Yes.
And I think finding 1, the point in finding 1 is that there was a control in place, a system control that was turned off. inadvertently. So that's not the computer system's problem. That's some human error that resulted in a control being deactivated. So I can't speak to why Maryland Think now costs $600 million at this point, and the functionality of it. I know it's supposed to be the end all cure all of all of our IT issues with human services and the health department. But in this case, this is not necessarily a computer problem. It's a people problem, I think. Josh, is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I would say the findings consistently aren't computer problems. For example, the finding that we had that Kathy mentioned, that they don't have records of many applications for TCA. It's not a computer problem, just like where, if someone's not scanning the records, someone's not keeping the records. It's just, I know sometimes people like to sell computers as the be all end all to, so it's a panacea, but it's just, it doesn't work. I mean, as you know, Delegate Resnick, that it just doesn't work that way in the real world.
And if I may, Mr. Chair, one last follow-up. The one thing I didn't see in the findings, which I'm hopeful for, but I don't know if it's something that you all even looked at. The exact opposite problem of the overpayments is we have seen over the last few years, the department using any excuse they can to knock somebody off the benefit rolls, late application, missing signature, improper, whatever it may be, whatever minor administrative failure on the part of the applicant who, in their personal lives are probably going through a whole lot to be in these programs anyway. We've seen the department systemically drop them off of roles at the first sign of some sort of an administrative hassle. Have we seen that problem cured? Did you look into that at all, or is that still an ongoing issue?
Yeah, we did not specifically look into that. We were more focused on when they were wrongfully paying. But I get what you're saying. I sincerely get what you're saying, because that you think about the poor person who's dealing with a host of issues, and this is the last thing they want to deal with. But yeah, we did not focus on that.
But I should add to Josh, I mean, clearly we're compassionate for those people, but if we had tested that for those attributes, and if the department had dropped them because there was something that was not done that regulation said should have been done, we probably would not have taken exception to that. We would have looked for the compliance with the existing rules and regulations to make sure that the administration was properly handling it. The issue of the compassion or working with the applicant, something maybe the department should have done, that probably would not have been under our purview.
Sounds good. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chair, for letting me go on.
Thank you, Delegate Resnick. I see that we have a hand raised from Delegate Arntz. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Hooks, briefly, when was the last time this group was audited?
2019 was 2019 was our most recent we issued report prior to this, and that would have gone up through the end of April of 2017 would have been our audit period.
I think a few years ago, we discussed when we find these types of problems, these repeat offenders, and when you're dealing with significant dollars like this, didn't we put that on a frequency roll, like a list of being audited more frequently?
We have the ability to audit between 3 and 4 years, the state agencies. The max is 4. And one of the things that we do is we do have a monitoring process in place when certain agencies have so many repeat findings, and we do get status reports and we do desk reviews of the status reports, and perhaps sometimes those status reports present a rosier picture than is really truthful. In this case, I can't speak to why we did not get to them every 3 years instead of every 4 years. I know there are about a dozen agencies we that we audit more frequently. Sorry about that. We audit more frequently. This one we did not. I'm not going to take a mea culpa, but I think I will. We do have some other audits we had to work in. We had some performance audits at the Baltimore City Police Department, 4 of those that we had to do in the last 2 years. which did strain our resources somewhat. We have received new positions in the current budget, some new positions that'll help us with some of the backlog. So we're hoping to work our way through, but you're correct. We probably could have done this one a little more frequently than every 4 years. You're correct.
Okay, I'm good with that, but I'm just thinking that the follow-up, when you say you do some spot checks here and there, I think there's some accountability with the department also to maintain those follow-ups and maybe be put on that checklist. And I would suggest that we need to find a better way of handling that with them right now, because I don't know, what is the total dollar amount we're looking at here that's been paid out? You mentioned a bunch of different numbers.
Yeah, it says here that according to DHS records, payments made during fiscal year 21 for programs under its oversight totaled $2.3 billion.
That's a pretty big dollar. And I was wondering, is there any methodology within the department to recoup those funds?
That would be a question for the department at this point. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there is, but that would be a question for the secretary.
Okay, thank you.
And that question will come up in our next audit we're going to talk about also.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Delegate Arndt. Just noticed I was not unmuted. Appreciate your points and points well taken. I do agree that, I think it can be something that the budget committees can take into account and should maybe look at, particularly when there are repeat findings with these agencies that keep coming forward. So I know we have some members of various budget committees here, encourage them to take that into consideration too. We, seeing no other questions, any other questions from the committee members? All right, seeing no further questions, thank you, Mr. Hook, Mr. Adler, Ms. Clark. And we'll go on to the Department of Human Services. We have representatives from the department here. I think we will first turn it over to Mr. Schuster, Special Assistant Secretary. You can introduce your team.
Good morning. Good morning, Chair Lamb and Chair Chang and members of the committee. My name is Lashira Ayala. I am the Executive Director for the Family Investment Administration. We appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today and discuss the October 2022 Legislative Audit Report of the Department's Family Investment Administration for the period of May 2017 through May 2021. Unfortunately, Secretary Padilla has a critical scheduling conflict. She sends her deepest regrets to the committee. With me today is Augusta Natingmanimana, Family Investment Administration Deputy Executive Director for Programs. You have our testimony, which I won't repeat here. In the interest of time, I will be brief in highlighting some of the department's key efforts. We first and foremost are committed and dedicated to the well-being of our constituents. The Maryland Department of Human Services administers public assistance benefits to over 1 million Maryland residents. Our focus continues to be providing critical services expeditiously to our constituents. DHS stands by its response provided in the audit report. We continue to take audit findings very seriously and recognize the importance of audits as a tool for continuous improvement. In fact, in response to the last audit report issued in 2019, FIA immediately began to initiate several corrective action measures to resolve the findings. Unfortunately, shortly thereafter, the once-in-a-lifetime, unprecedented health crisis hit the world. Like many others, Maryland felt the effects of the pandemic. Similar to a hurricane, where the primary focus and efforts are on saving lives, FIA was laser focused on ensuring our constituents' needs were adequately met. Implementing the federal waivers and the many needed provisions did not always allow for our normal operations and service delivery protocols, but the department remains proud of all the work and effort made to support vulnerable adults, families, and children during such a very critical time. these measures that were taken aligned with the guidance and flexibilities being provided nationwide by the U.S. Department of Agriculture and Health and Human Services. And they included, but were not limited to, suspending benefit renewals, suspending quality control reviews, suspending the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program and Temporary Cash Assistance Program work requirements, suspending interview requirements, suspending periodic reports, and suspending on-site contract monitoring visits, and many more. For Marylanders that were in need of food, it was an acutely stressful period of time as they tried to navigate the uncharted waters of the pandemic. And our department took every action within our control to ensure that this global health crisis did not become a food security crisis. Specifically, we ensured that over 200,000 new applicants received benefits expeditiously. We ensured that benefits for the households who were actively participating in our programs before the pandemic were maintained. And we simultaneously implemented new programs such as the Pandemic Electronic Benefits Transfer, also known as PEBT program, which continues to support over 550,000 vulnerable Maryland children. Between PEBT and the federal funded SNAP emergency allotment programs alone, our department has issued over $3.2 billion federal dollars to needy families and individuals, in addition to nutrition assistance benefits since the pandemic began. We are proud of the work the FIA staff have done during this pandemic time. During the unprecedented global public health emergency, our department was innovative and exhausted all measures to ensure that we secured every resource available to support Marylanders. Nonetheless, we are committed to addressing the noted recommendations, and as such have resumed the implementation of our pre-pandemic corrective actions, efforts, and other necessary enhancements which include but are not limited to implementing the quarterly Connecting the Dots events, which we implemented in 2021. It's an FIA initiative that engages our frontline staff from all 24 local departments of social services to create awareness regarding ongoing compliance issues and serves as an avenue for local offices to share best practices. In 2018 and in 2019, DHS facilitated annual contract compliance training. A third annual training was in planning phase in February of 2020, and then the pandemic hit. In 2023, we will resume this pre-pandemic annual training. In 2021, DHS implemented enhancements to its eligibility system that included system controls that has resolved findings. Focused training and intensive technical support, as well as active monitoring, continues. As stated, we are first and foremost committed and dedicated to the well-being of our constituents. The department continuously aims to improve our operations and service delivery. The department will implement the audit recommendations to which we committed accordingly. This concludes my testimony. Thank you again for the opportunity to brief you on our work in this area. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Ayala. Appreciate the presentation from the department. Any other folks from the department presenting, or are they just there for questions only?
For questions, sir.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll open up for questions from committee members. So I'll start with some questions. So you certainly cite the COVID-19 pandemic as one reason why the department has been delayed in implementing some changes to address the recommendations that have been found as part of the audit. Some of these findings, though, because they're repeat, stem from before the pandemic. And I'm trying to understand why some of these findings, which seem on some ways pretty basic and procedural, have not been addressed even before the pandemic started. So an example would be just collecting proper documentation for eligibility. That should be part of a routine process that state employees go through when they're approving these applications to collect the proper documentation, regardless of whether there's a pandemic or not. And in multiple instances cited here as part of the audit, that wasn't conducted properly. Can you speak to why some of these findings are repeat findings that stem from even before the pandemic? And some of these are just procedural, not even in terms of benefits being outlaid to individuals.
Yes, thank you, Senator Lamb, for the opportunity to answer and address your question. For the procedural findings that you noted that were observed or identified in the prior audit report, and then also identified in the most recent review, the department, as mentioned, has taken action. So as one example, with our Connecting the Dots quarterly meetings, in which we meet with all frontline staff from all of our jurisdictions, we cover these types of procedural activities. In addition to that, within our internal case review process at the local department level, the expectation is, as a part of the review of the eligibility determination, that the review of case documentation is completed. So this is one in which I would say is not a matter of pandemic impacting it, but an area in which we have continued progress towards improving. And as such, we will continue to use multifaceted strategies to ensure that the documentation is captured, and not only captured, but it is scanned appropriately within our systems.
Okay, thank you. I think also that, certainly understand that there was greater need during the pandemic, but we also have found and have heard from constituents that there were significant delays in some individuals who had needs in getting their electronic benefits transfer cards, for example, even during the pandemic. And so, I'm concerned about that, as well as the fact that, I think obviously there are greater needs during the pandemic, but if there are people who are ineligible or who wouldn't otherwise qualify for these benefits, who are receiving them, it could be taking away funding or other resources that could be allocated to others who actually need those benefits as well. And the fact that there are others that may not be eligible that are still going through the system could be slowing down your processing, so that it's resulting in what we heard during the pandemic, with slow benefits being provided to those who actually need it as well. So, I think the fact that the pandemic has caused a lot of challenges in response is understandable, but I think it needs to be taken as a whole too, in recognizing that there were probably individuals that were receiving benefits that did not qualify, and it could potentially have an impact on those who did qualify in their experience as well.
Thank you, Senator Lamb. So for the EBT item, I do want to speak very briefly on that. In addition to the mailing of the electronic benefits cards, all 24 local departments of social services do have cards on site. We continuously work to ensure the community is educated on being able to retrieve a card on site and communicating with our department. We certainly take back for room for improvement to ensure that that message is expanded all the more. For the situation in which we did have to have some rapid system changes made to be able to accommodate the federal policy changes that resulted in every SNAP recipient receiving the maximum SNAP benefit, which is different from the operations as normal. That was a temporal item as far as those households that were potentially ineligible. And I say potentially because due to the changes that had to be made, the policy changes, there was a possibility that these individuals were in fact eligible. Nonetheless, that particular change has been resolved. It was resolved in 2021. So as we are looking at things today, and to your concern, which we share in that wanting to ensure that everyone who is potentially eligible for our benefits has complete access to those benefits expeditiously. That is not a source of, I would say, concern at this point, because with the resolution that has taken place in 2021, anyone who applies for services and then their information, once eligibility is determined, if they are ineligible, we are able to follow our normal processes, and those individuals would not be delaying or preventing individuals who are eligible from accessing benefits at this time.
Okay, thank you. I see we have a question from Delegate Arntz. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a brief couple things here. Based on your comments to Chairman Lamb, I would assume, though, that when you did all these overpayments and people were able to get in the system that way, that there's got to be some liability on the underside of that, where the people that really need it were maybe possibly overlooked, and that would concern me moving forward. But I was wondering if there are any methods or policies, my previous question to the auditor, how are you going about recouping some of this overpayment that's been out there? This is $2.2 some billion. Do you have a process in place for that?
Thank you for your question, Delegate Arntz. So for the liability item, I'll speak to that first. There is no liability in that any benefits, and for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, also known as SNAP and food stamps, it is a federal funded program. There is no cap as far as for each state how much funding will be provided to eligible SNAP recipients. So any individual who receives SNAP and is deemed ineligible does not negatively impact a separate individual from being able to receive the benefits that they are eligible for as a part of the program. For the recoupment piece, I would like to clarify the roughly $3.2 billion is the total amount of our family that is inclusive of our family investment programs, mainly federal programs in which we issue benefits to eligible recipients. So it's not solely the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. It is a combination of many programs. For the recoupment piece, and this is for, again, a time-related item, limited item, in reference to changes that we had to make, again, to ensure that every Marylander that was eligible for the SNAP program would receive the maximum amount of benefits. During that period, our federal overseeing agency provided a blanket waiver to all states, because all states had to make these rapid changes in 2020 to support the needs of constituents to ensure that they receive those benefits. And it is the department's stance at this time that because there was a waiver over that period, and in accordance with the program rules, we will not seek to seek federal overpayments for that particular period of time. As it relates to our normal operations, normal program processes, we resumed the overpayments process this year. And in our resumption of our quality control reviews and identification of any overpayments subsequent to the period in which was waived, we are following our normal process in doing those recoupments.
So I guess you're saying then that whoever applied for it, it's free money, you're good, go away, everything's happy. And that's taxpayers' dollars I'm worried about, whether it's federal or state. But what about in the, again, this is a repeat finding. How do you differentiate between pre-pandemic, post-pandemic? And I guess I really do have a hard time grasping the fact that I could have applied for SNAP and you would have given me the maximum. I think that there's got to be some recourse for the state or the federal government to come back and tell these people this is an act of, I don't know, would you call it fraud? I might call it fraud if you're claiming something you don't deserve. And the policy, there is no policy to recoup those dollars within the department.
Thank you, sir. So finding one is not a repeat finding. What we are discussing in reference to the SNAP program and the individuals who potentially were ineligible during a limited time period, that is not a repeat finding. What is a repeat finding is for our temporary assistance program. Those are among our most vulnerable constituents, individuals who are pregnant, or individuals with children, potentially disabled. And for that particular program, the finding is surrounding the fact that for those families, those individuals and families who have continued to be eligible and receive the benefits post 60 months of receiving those benefits or post 5 years, we have to have evidence of a hardship for them to continue to be eligible for the program. And in our review, and it is a reference in the audit report, in the auditor's review of roughly 15 cases, upon a re-review by our department's team, we identified 3 cases, 3 households that potentially may have no longer been eligible, that required us to take some additional action with them. But of the 15, the others, the documentation was either present or it was not, but we were able to identify the hardship that would deem them eligible for the state benefits.
Okay, I want to be clear. I'm not questioning the people that need. We need to take care of the people that are in need. It's the people that were abusing the system that I'm concerned with, and that's the dollars and cents. And I think the audit reported a whole lot of findings in those areas, and those are the ones that concern me. And we can discuss this later, but I think it's paramount that we educate ourselves on this to the point where we don't keep giving money out to those that don't meet the requirements, and we be also, on the other hand, we be sympathetic to those that do. And I think there's a lot of money we're talking about, and those dollars concern me, whether they're federal or state. But thank you for your answers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Arntz. And I think I also want to emphasize Delegate Arntz's point too, that in addition to the funding, this is also effort on the part of the department or the agency, right? And so if there are, just using as an example, if 5% of the folks that are receiving benefits aren't otherwise eligible and shouldn't be receiving those benefits, regardless of the funding, that's 5% of bandwidth that the department is spending distributing benefits to those who wouldn't be eligible and could otherwise be distributing benefits more efficiently or quickly to those who should be receiving them. So, it's not just the dollar and cents, which, I agree with Delegate Arntz's point, but it's also the effort involved with the department as well. The one follow-up here, because the auditors did point this out, that you cite the fact that there was a federal waiver from U.S. Department of Agriculture. However, our auditors said that they could not find clarifying documentation from USDA to support the department's interpretation. Can you explain why there is not documentation to be able to support the point that you're making here?
Thank you, Senator Lamb. So the information that the department has available to it from our federal partner, we provided to the auditors. As it relates to why the federal partner has not provided any additional documentation, I cannot speak to that. I will say that, as mentioned, this part of our process or flexibility and waivers during the public health emergency period did a host of changes, very rapid changes, host of documentation regarding those changes. And while we are yet still in a transition phase, our federal partners continue to provide us guidance on addressing a number of areas, but this is one that we have not received any additional information of at this time.
Okay. Well, one follow-up then, I guess, maybe for our auditors to Ms. Clark or Mr. Adler. Why do you contend that you didn't receive clarifying documentation from USDA for this interpretation?
Senator Lamb, the audit report includes Exhibit 1 and Exhibit 2, which are the documents we were given for this waiver. They talk about temporary suspension of activities. We read the plain language and did not interpret it to be a permanent waiver of recollection of this money as the department did. And our recommendation, our third recommendation for finding one was for FIA to simply ask the federal government for clarification that their interpretation was correct. They have not received a response because they refused to ask for it. So I think that's really the issue. We had asked them to seek out clarification of the interpretation of this language, which we included as exhibits in the audit report. And in their response, they refused to obtain that documentation or even ask for it. So that's really the issue. And I also would like to add my 2 cents about this federal state issue, along with you and Delegate Arntz. I'm old enough to remember Senator McCabe from the SBT years ago. And we were at a hearing where someone mentioned that it was federal money and therefore it didn't matter. And I vividly remember Senator McCabe saying, I pay federal taxes as well as state taxes, and all taxes matter. So I would agree with both you and Delegate Arntz about the issue. But that's really the issue, is that they refuse to seek out clarification from the federal government, relying instead on Exhibit 1 and Exhibit 2 that are in the audit report.
All right, thank you for
That's the
clarification,
issue.
Mr. Hook.
You're welcome.
Ms. Ayala, will the department ask the USDA for clarification?
So for our department, we, in our interpretation of the documentation and in understanding that the overpayment process is predicated on quality control reviews. During the period in question, quality control reviews nationwide were suspended. So we remain with our response, and we will not, until our federal partners provide any additional information regarding the matter, we will not submit any inquiries to them.
Okay, so the answer to that is the department will not seek clarification. I see that Senator Kramer has his hand up, and then back to Delegate Arntz.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So what I'm trying to get a handle on here is that the department has given an interpretation. Who in the department provided that interpretation? Did that come from the Attorney General's office within the department?
The Family Investment Administration, not the Attorney General's office within our department, provided the interpretation. It is the Family Investment Administration who works directly with or collaborates directly with our federal partners.
All right, let me rephrase the question. Who specifically within the department has made this interpretation? The individual. Who is the individual that created this interpretation?
I would have to follow up with that information regarding the exact individual. As mentioned, our Family Investment Administration administers the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program for the Department of Human Services. We have a number of offices within our administration, which.
And I appreciate all of that, and
development
forgive me, but I will start cutting you off a little bit when I think we're getting a little far afield. I'm asking specifically, I understand there are lots of people in the agency. Who is the individual that gave this interpretation? And is it your representation that the secretary of the agency has given the secretary's interpretation to this individual and saying, yes, I am accepting this individual's interpretation? So I am asking, and I'm kind of taken aback that you're, representing at the moment that you don't even know who that individual is that gave this interpretation. And then can I assume that the secretary had to have adopted that interpretation, and that's where we stand at the moment?
The department will follow up regarding the questions that you provided.
So how quickly will you be following up on this? When will I know who is the individual that gave this interpretation and the basis for that interpretation? And then once again, what I'm asking you, did the secretary take this individual's interpretation and adopt it as the secretary's own interpretation? Because it sounds like that's what you're saying.
That is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is respectfully, the department will follow up with the questions that you have provided.
Okay, so once again, you did not answer my question as to when we might have that interpretation information, the specific individual. Something that maybe you will have for me later today, tomorrow at the latest. I should think, as important as this decision is, and in light of the auditors taking exception with the way this decision has been reached, that it would be very important for us to have an understanding when we are talking about the significant amount of money that evidently was distributed. And, I guess for me, the concern is we have what appears to be incompetence and a significant failure on the part of the department. And now there's just this effort to perhaps sweep it under a rug by simply saying, oh, well, it's okay for us to have been incompetent by virtue of the fact that we are, as a department, giving an interpretation that will permit the incompetence to go without any response to how it came to pass, and that we have no responsibility to the taxpayers to address recouping those losses.
The department's responses will be provided as soon as possible, no later than tomorrow.
I'm sorry, you said tomorrow?
No later than tomorrow.
That's great. I would appreciate that. And let me ask you, has there, and Mr. Chair, if I'm getting a little too far in the wrong direction, although I kept hearing references to SNAP, and I know this particular audit did not address that. But just a couple of months ago, within the last 2 months, the Finance Committee held a hearing in Annapolis to address significant concerns about thefts of SNAP benefits the failure of the department to have tighter controls to ensure that those thefts did not occur, and a total failure to reimburse the accounts of the individuals whose benefits were stolen. Can you provide us with an update in the most recent numbers and statistics as to what those numbers are, how many people have continued to have their SNAP benefits stolen, and what the department is doing about it? It was interesting at the hearing, we were told that every time a question came up about the concerns and the failures, the response throughout that hearing was, well, in the last 2 weeks, we have made the following changes. And in the last 2 weeks, we decided we will implement the following. So my concern was that had it not been for that finance committee hearing, all those decisions that had taken place 2 weeks prior to that hearing may not have occurred. And I'm just curious if we can get some updates on how they are working out and if in fact they've been implemented. And I realize that's a little bit of aside from where we are at the moment, but would the department perhaps follow up and provide that information as well? It would be very much appreciated. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Kramer. We will do that.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Senator Kramer. To Senator Kramer's earlier 2 questions, can you provide that in writing back to the committee staff so that we can share with the full committee? Those are the, excuse me, those are the questions of one, what individuals were responsible for this interpretation, and 2, was the secretary aware and agrees with this interpretation? Is that going to be provided back in writing to the committee?
And Mr. Chair, if I may, can we also ask by what authority this individual had to make that interpretation on behalf of the department and the state, if I may add that as well? Thank you.
Of course, certainly. So Ms. Ayala, if you can have the department respond to back this in writing by tomorrow, as you'd stated, that would be appreciated. We'll go to Delegate Arndt, followed by Delegate Harrison and then Delegate Resnick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just an observation and a quick question on it is, I noted in Mr. Hook's response that he doesn't necessarily agree with the responses from the department of what they're going to do to fix it. And we heard that the department has no intention of going back and asking the questions that our audit has brought out to them. Are there any processes that we can do to ensure that the departments take the recommendations that the audit people come forward with? What I'm saying is, do we need to put legislation in to sit back and say that we now can control that? I appreciate that the department may not want to do something, but this is the state taxpayers' dollars we're working with, and that when we see a recommendation that makes sense, such as the one we're discussing now, is there a process we can do to ensure that that happens? I don't know who I asked the question of, but maybe Mr. Hooks.
Oh, sorry, I'm sorry, Delegate Ernst. I wasn't quite sure who you were asking that. Delegate Lamb, Senator Lamb alluded to the answer. Every year, some staff at Office of Policy Analysis will look at our audit reports. They'll look at a number of repeat findings, and they will make recommendations, I think, through the Joint Audit Committee to the budget committees to withhold funding from state agencies that have not complied with either significant outstanding audit issues or have not corrected a number of repeat findings. And it's through the JCR language that's done. And the amounts withheld can range from maybe $100,000 to several $100,000. And I will say that methodology does seem to be effective. We've had a number of agencies, even with a very small amount withheld, have taken great pains to try to get that money back, to claw the money back, and to show that they've corrected the issue. So there is a mechanism in place, and it's through the JCR language that is usually accomplished. And I should add too that the Legislative Auditor's Office, if you notice in all of our audit reports, we make recommendations because we cannot compel anybody to do anything. The only way we have of enabling compliance is through the pervasiveness of our arguments and through this committee and the actions of this committee, such as making recommendations to the budget committees.
Well, I think it was important when you came back on the line, when we were discussing this process about asking the federal government for something, you were pretty adamant about some of the responses and how that was done. And I think maybe it would be good to hear your responses sometimes to their responses, meaning they've come back here and said that they don't want to comply. They don't feel we need to comply. And you seem to be pretty adamant about, no, this is what we did. And I think it might be beneficial at some point because we listened to you up front, then we listened to the department. Yes. And no other conversation is had because you're sitting there giving recommendations, which that is your job, that's your business, you know it well, and you're looking out, in my opinion, for the taxpayers and the state's money. And perhaps maybe we could get some comments in the future on some of these things that you believe.
Oh, most certainly, we can do that. And I would add too that the exhibits I mentioned are from a federal website. Those documents are from a website, and frankly, we were dismayed by the department's response because they simply could have sent a letter to the federal government asking for clarification. And if it had come back in their favor, we would have dropped the issue. But just to refuse.
I agree with you. I think that's a very common sense thing to do with taxpayer dollars. That's, if I were the head of the department, I would do that. But I'm not the head of the department. I don't have all the facts in front of me. But I appreciate the answers. I just said something we need to keep an eye on moving forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you, Delegate Arndt. Next, we'll go to Delegate Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess I only have a comment and not necessarily a question, but I think that I was just kind of, I wanted to clutch my pearls when I heard that they would not follow up and do what has been requested. I don't understand how an agency can basically just say that they're not going to do something specifically that that has been recommended or has been requested by legislators. I don't understand that. And so I'm looking forward to hearing and seeing what comes from this, because I just think that that's a lot of audacity, I think. And I'm a little dismayed and disturbed by that particular language, and perhaps I misunderstood. But I think that we need to ensure that we are responsible for taxpayers' dollars. We're all taxpayers. Each and every one of us pays taxes, whether it's federal government, state government, local municipal, if we're in a municipality. And as legislators, we're responsible for that. And so if we ask an agency to be responsible, then we expect that to be done. Maybe I'm misunderstanding something. And if so, I do stand corrected, and I look forward to hearing that correction so that I can make sure that I am speaking appropriately. But that one just kind of took me aback. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Delegate Harrison. Next, we have no comment from the agency. We'll go to Delegate Resnick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a follow-up to a question I had on the auditor, and it's sort of a timing issue, not directly related to any of the findings, but Ms. Ayala, you are a captured audience at the moment, so I'm going to take advantage of that. I literally just got an email from a constituent. And this is related to the question I asked the auditors about looking into unreasonable denials of benefits. The constituent is a senior citizen living in my district who wrote, "Good afternoon. A lot has changed in my life over the last few months. I am currently homeless, and Harley and I," Harley is his dog, "are staying at a hotel provided by the county. My food stamps were canceled because I evidently did not respond to a questionnaire on updating my information. I did not receive that questionnaire because it was sent out at a time I had to move out of my home due to foreclosure. I have been told I cannot receive food stamps until this is cleared up. Unfortunately, I cannot fill out the form I need because I have no way to print it out. Any help you could provide would be greatly appreciated. I am a veteran and feel like I've been deserted by my country." Now, Ms. Ayala, what can we do about my constituent's case right now?
Thank you, Delegate Resnick. If we could reach out to a member within your team, we will directly reach out to the constituent to resolve the matter regarding his SNAP case.
Sounds good. What is your contact information directly so that I can have my staff reach out to you directly?
Yes, sir. It is my first name, LASHE, 2 R's, A.AYALA @maryland.gov.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Delegate Resnick. Any other questions from the committee? You raise your virtual hand or raise your physical hand. Seeing none, I think we can wrap up this audit of the Department of Human Services. Thank you for attending. Next, we will move to the Department of Health and the audit of the Behavioral Health Administration and Medical Care Program Administration. This is of the Administrative Services Organization for Behavioral Health Services. And we will begin with our legislative audit team and Mr. Huff.
Thank you, Senator Lamb. The second audit that OLA will present is the Maryland Department of Health Behavioral Health Administration, or BHA. Before we begin, I need to clarify that the scope of this audit includes the BHA's responsibilities overseeing the public behavioral health system and the Medical Care Programs Administration's monitoring of the Administrative Service Organization's contract deliverables, claims processing, provider audits, and information system security. Because of this broad responsibility, OLA referred to the agency audited in this report as MDH. And this represents a change in audit approach, as during the prior OLA audit cycle, MCPA's monitoring of the ASO was audited separately. This change occurred because OLA staff members are always assessing opportunities to increase or enhance audit effectiveness and efficiency. Although this OLA report only contained 9 report findings, due to the financial significance and repeat nature of many findings, we determined that MDH's accountability and compliance level was unsatisfactory in accordance with the rating system we established in conformity with state law. This means that this audit report will be subject to a formal OLA follow-up review within the next year. There are 3 other issues I would like to discuss before turning the formal presentation over to Josh Adler, the Assistant Audit Director, with the aid of Kathy Clark again, the Audit Manager, and Jim Podhorniak, the Audit Senior. The first is that this represents the first OLA report presented to the committee that includes a cybersecurity finding, which had been redacted from the public audit report in accordance with State Government Article 2-1224I. Consequently, there is an additional confidential slide in your package for finding 5 that will be discussed in a closed session after the remainder of the report is presented and discussed. The second point, which Josh will discuss in detail, is the disagreement between OLA and MDH on finding 8 and the related recommendation, which is related to the assessment of liquidated damages for vendor performance that does not comply with the related contract. This disagreement deals with a lack of accountability, both for vendor non-performance and for state employees' responsibility for decision-making when determining to not assess and collect liquidated damages as allowed for in state contracts. My original speech says I recall from past committee hearings, but I can say I can recall from the FIA hearing that there are frequently questions about who was responsible state employee and what were consequences for audit exceptions. In this case, we recommended the establishment of a formal policy for determining the assessment of liquidated damages. This would enable us to identify state agency officials who made the decision not to pursue damages and the reason or reasons for that decision. Implementation of our recommendation would provide a measure of accountability for decisions that, in this case, affect several $1 million of potentially recoverable funds by the state. Finally, speaking of funds, OLA's presentation will highlight a number of findings with which MDH agreed that collectively total over $500 million of actual and potential losses or overpayments. With that, I am now going to turn it over to Josh and his team to present the results of the report.
Good morning. As Greg mentioned, my name is Josh Adler, and I'm an Assistant Director with the Office of Legislative Audits. I'm here today with Kathy Clark, Audit Manager, and Jim Ponforniak, Audit Senior, to discuss our audit of 2 units within the Maryland Department of Health. The first is the Behavioral Health Administration, which I'll refer to as BHA. BHA provides community-based mental health and substance-related disorder services with expenditures totaling $356.6 million in fiscal year 21. Second, which is the primary focus of our report, is a part of the Medical Care Programs Administration, which I'll refer to as MCPA, a lot of alphabet soup here, which is responsible for the Behavioral Health Administration's Administrative Service Organization, which I'll refer to as ASO. Now, why is this audit important? What we're going to talk about today is a story of the state hiring a contractor to provide critical behavioral health services to hundreds of thousands of Marylanders. We identify problems with virtually every aspect of the contract, from MDA's initial procurement to the contractor's performance, to MDH's monitoring, and finally, the MDH is not holding the contractor accountable through liquidated damages for its poor performance. Now, most of the findings in the report relate to the Administrative Service Organization, the ASO. So before I discuss the findings, I'd like to provide some background about the ASO. As noted on page 4 of our handout, MCPA's ASO is responsible for determining behavioral health recipient eligibility, authorizing recipient services, paying provider claims through its fee-for-service payments system, and performing oversight providers. The ASO had disbursements totaling $1.8 billion with a B in fiscal year 2021. In November 2018, MCPA solicited proposals for a new ASO contract. It received responses from 2 vendors, which one had been providing ASO services to MCPA. The proposals were reviewed by a 3-member committee, and the contract was awarded to the vendor that had not been serving MCPA beforehand. The ASO contracts for 5 years, from January 2020 to December 2024, with one additional 2-year option and a cumulative value of almost $200 million. The new ASO uses services of, this is key, of 7 subcontractors to meet various contract requirements. Proceeding to finding 1, which is on page 5 of our handout. We know that MCPA didn't perform an independent review of the past experience and the qualifications of the subcontractors responsible for performing critical work under the contract. Rather, MCPA relied on the bidder's representation that the subcontractor would do good work. We noted that the bidder only had limited experience with the subcontractor. And we also noted that 3 other localities had very negative experiences with the subcontractor. As noted on page 6, when MDH presented the contract to the Board of Public Works, the Board of Public Works questioned MDH about the winning vendor's experience as an ASO and its ability to perform satisfactorily, considering its financial proposal was $72.1 million less than the incumbent ASO's proposal. MDH responded to the board that had done, quote, a lot of due diligence, unquote, of the winning vendor. We concluded that it was possible that the anticipated savings from awarding the contract to the ASO may have been negated by various subsequent events, such as overpayments to the providers and lost federal income. Moving on to finding 2, which is on page 7 of our handout. We noted that MCPA didn't make sure that the ASO's claims processing system was functioning prior to launch. The claims processing system was the heart of the contract with the ASO. And since it didn't work, there are many problems. For example, the system couldn't process provider service authorization requests to ensure that requested services were medically necessary. Now, the way the system is supposed to work is that a doctor tells the ASO that they recommend a patient with a specific treatment, such as inpatient hospital. Then the ASO is supposed to evaluate whether the patient is medically necessary for that care. But since the claims processing system didn't work, the requests went automatically, they were approved. The claims processing system also improperly denied valid claims and couldn't generate accurate claims payment information, which providers needed to determine whether they were paid properly. We also found the claims processing system wasn't able to properly process retroactive claims, resulting in the ASO making duplicate payments to providers. Now, MCPA couldn't quantify the duplicate payments, but advised it was a majority of approximately $102 million. Since the claims processing system didn't work and providers needed to be paid, from January 2020 through August 3rd, 2020, the MDH directed the ASO to make more than $1 billion in estimated payments based on the prior year's activity, instead of based on the current actual claims. Since then, the providers have had to submit claims data supporting the claims, and as of December 2021, MDH reported that the providers owe them about $224 million. Proceeding to findings 3 and 4, which are on page 8 of our handout, we know that MDH didn't perform audits of the ASO's health service request approvals. As I mentioned earlier, one of the main jobs of the ASO was to evaluate whether the treatments were medically necessary. As such, MDH has procedures to perform annual audits of the ASO's health service request approvals. But we know that as of September 2021, these audits weren't occurring or completed. In finding 4, we noted that MCPA and DHA didn't ensure that the ASO performed a sufficient number of provider audits, that the audits were of current activity, and that overpayments were covered. Under the contract terms, the ASO is to audit clinical and financial records of providers for purposes such as ensuring that patient medical records agreed to pay claims that identify and resolve overpayments. As Greg mentioned, finding 5 is about cybersecurity. And in accordance with State Government Article 2-1224, this information was redacted from the public copy of the audit report, and we'll go into the cone of silence afterwards to discuss. Proceeding to finding 6, which is page 10 of our handout. We know that the ASO failed to implement certain IT requirements specified in its contract, which prevented MCPA from obtaining federal funding $28.8 million. $28.8 million is gone. We're not getting it. While MDH withheld $4.4 million from the ASO. This is obviously a relatively small change compared to the $28.8 million in lost federal funding. Proceeding to finding 7, which is on page 11 of our handout. We know that MCPA didn't have a process to timely investigate and resolve claims by the ASO for which federal reimbursement was denied or approved for a different amount than the amount requested. For example, as of September 2021, there are approximately 292,000 unresolved denied claims, totaling approximately $106.7 million. We are advised by MDH management that resolving these claims, meaning the $107 million, wasn't a priority because MDH was focused on more significant issues, such as recouping provider overpayments. Proceeding to finding 8, which is the one finding in the report MDH disagreed with implementing our recommendation. This has to do with holding the contractor accountable for the various problems that we identified. We noted that MDH hadn't developed a formal policy on liquidated damages to aid in determining the appropriateness of assessing such damages. Furthermore, MCPA hadn't assessed liquidated damages, which totaled $20.5 million. That's $20.5 million, similar to the earlier federal funds, which is gone. If we're not asking for it, it's gone. And we're permitted by the ASO contract, despite the vendor's ongoing failure to provide an operational system or comply with certain contract requirements. MDH disagreed with our recommendation to assess liquidated damages because, number one, it was concerned that such actions would discourage the ASO from resolving the many problems it has. And number two, MDH was concerned about a lawsuit and the uncertainty of the results of that. Our perspective is that MDH's position is contrary to the intent of state law that requires a provision for liquidated damages as appropriate in procurement contracts, which implies the damages are subject to assessment. In addition, MDH didn't specifically agree to establish a formal policy on the assessment of liquidated damages, including criteria for conditions warranting damages and the determination of the amount to be assessed. Based on the issues identified with the ASO's performance in this report, we stand by our findings and recommendation. Our last finding is finding 9, which is discussed on page 13 of the handout. We know that MDH circumvented state procurement regulations by obtaining IT services totaling almost $20 million from one vendor without competition. This concludes our presentation about the Maryland Department of Health audit. Thank you so very much for your interest, and be happy to address any questions that you may have.
All right, thank you, Mr. Adler. Questions for the auditors from the committee? Any questions for the auditors? I have one question just to be very clear. Is it your interpretation that the department had not gone through the full kind of initiation process before launching the ASO claims system? Because it sounds as though they had not gone through the full kind of testing process before launching it. In some ways, it sounds as though they had moved forward knowing that the system was likely to fail because they hadn't even properly tested before rolling it out.
That's 100% right. Yes.
Okay. So had they tested it before they rolled it out, it's quite possible some of these shortcomings and all of the concerns that we've heard from providers not being able to be compensated could have been addressed, and actually should have been addressed before the system was actually fully rolled out.
Right. Yes.
Okay. Any other questions for the auditor? Delegate Resnick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Adler, let me see if I understand this correctly. According to your findings, the department did not pursue any liquidated damages against the contractor because there was a potential threat that the contractor would essentially stop paying out benefits or stop resolving the benefits?
That they'll run. They'll stop and run. That's it.
So essentially what you're saying is that that in potential pursuit of contract breaches, the contractor then threatened to create more contract breaches, which forced the department to decide they did not want to pursue it.
I'm not sure if the contractor, it could be a question for the department. I'm not sure if the contractor openly said, here's the deal. If you impose these liquidated damages, we're just going to stop working. I'm not sure if it was that explicit, but the department's position is that they are afraid of that. And they do not want to be in a position where they don't have a contractor and they have to pay these, they have to do all the services that the contractor was supposed to do. It's almost, in my mind, it's like too big to fail. And when the contractor isn't performing well, you know, we're just, the department's position is we can't do anything.
So as a follow-up to that, projecting into the future, as you are aware, the department is preparing a new RFP well in advance of the expiration of the existing contract. We understand that RFP is supposed to be released before, I believe, the end of the year. Assuming a new contractor is selected, if that is the determination of the department and the Board of Public Works, there is nothing stopping us from pursuing any contract breaches in the future under the current contract once the existing contractor is no longer performing.
To my knowledge, yes. You're 100% right.
Thank you.
So just to be clear on Delegate Resnick's question, the next administration, next leadership at the department could choose to pursue those liquidated damages. Is that correct?
As I think what would end up happening is, let's play it out. If they said we're going to do liquidated damages, the current department the current department would have to be on board with assessing it. Let's put that one. Meaning you'd have to get, otherwise there'd be there must probably be litigation, and we'd have to see how that would pan out. But yeah, the next administration could just say, yeah, we're going to impose liquidated damages.
Let me clarify. We're not lawyers. we're
Yeah.
CPAs.
Yeah.
Okay, so Josh has had business law 1 and 2. So I don't know if that covered this issue.
That's
So
right.
that might be a better question for legal counsel than it is for
Right.
auditors.
Right.
So I just want to,
Yeah.
just state that for the record.
I'm not a lawyer. I just play one on TV.
Yeah, plays on TV. Right.
We appreciate your guidance and interpretation. So thank you, Mr. Adler.
Senator Lamb, if I may, Brian Cannon, I'm the Director of Compliance. I just want to add, we could talk about perhaps recovering something under the next administration, but if you look at the findings that are in the report, the findings are not static. A lot of these findings are dynamic problems, and the potential losses increase every day that goes by. And I think that's something that needs to be addressed with the department. Pushing this down the road is just going to potentially increase the existing losses that are presented in this report. And if you look at the individual findings, it says it. It's as of this date, this is what the lost interest is. As of this date, this is what has not been collected. So that is the risk of trying to pursue this down the road, that potential losses that are identified here are just going to go up.
Thank you, Mr. Shannon. I think we'll hear from the department next, but they seem to contend that there were no losses. So Delegate Pendergrass.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to ask this of the auditors, whoever wants to answer. It's pretty basic. $28.8 million so far that you can identify that the state will not be paid because of the way this was run. So question one, who puts together and is responsible for accepting the bidder in the contract? Would that be the health department?
Yes, the health department puts it together. They say we want to award it to X company, and then they bring it before the Board of Public Works.
Would the health department be headed by the Secretary of Health, Dennis Schrader, who is, as always, AWOL at this hearing?
Secretary Schrader. Yes.
And who does Secretary Schrader report to?
Presumably the governor.
So tell me, if you can, where does the buck stop in that process, and who is responsible for this?
Presumably, Secretary Schrader answers to the governor. So
thank you very much for your answer. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any other questions for the auditors? Okay, seeing none, I think we're going to proceed to the department. And I think from the department this morning, we have Mr. Webster Yee. We also have Deputy Secretary Shu and Mr. Doggett from the Office of Internal Controls, Audit, Compliance, and Security at MDH.
Mr. Chair, Chair Lamb, Chair Chang, members of the Joint Committee, and others, good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I am Fred Doggett, Director of Internal Control, Audit, Compliance, and Information Security. One of my many hats is to be the primary liaison between MDH leadership and the program offices and our colleagues at OLA. With me here today to answer to field the questions are, as you mentioned, Assistant Secretary for Health Policy Webster Yee, Deputy Secretary for Healthcare Financing and Medicaid Steve Shu. We do not have an opening statement, but we are prepared to field questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, all right, thank you, Mr. Doggett. I think we can proceed directly to questions. I'm sure there are a lot of questions. I'll start off. We had asked for responses to questions that Delegate and Chairperson Pena Melnick had presented at a hearing before the Health and Government Operations Committee several weeks ago. We did receive a response from Mr. Yee to those questions. The response to those questions, paraphrasing it, sounds as though the department believes that no money was lost as a result of the lack of oversight in this contract with Optum. Is that a proper interpretation? And how can the department contend based on all the findings in this audit report, which we've asked the auditors to sum up the total losses to the state? And that sum, based on their report, totals over $500 million in losses to the state. And yet the answer, Mr. Yee, that's been presented from the department is that the department doesn't believe that they've lost any money. The state has not lost money, according to your letter. How can you explain that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Webster Yee, Assistant Secretary with Maryland Department of Health. With respect to your question, we have provided a response in writing. Before we sent the response to the committees, we checked very carefully with our finance offices, the Medicaid team, and we believe that our answer is accurate.
So even though you agree with many of the audit's findings, and of which the audit also concluded that there were hundreds of millions of dollars in funding that was lost, you're now also contending at the same time that the department has not lost any money. It sounds like there's a lot of alternative facts that the department is trying to present here that simply aren't true. If you're going to tell us that the sky is green, I don't think we can believe that. We're looking at an audit report that shows over $500 million of losses to the state. Why is it that you're not agreeing that there are actual losses that the state has incurred because of the mishandling of this contract?
And with respect, Mr. Chairman, that is an inaccurate characterization of the department's position.
How much has the state lost then, based on your interpretation?
Mr. Chairman, we have been very consistent in our responses. Again, we refer you to pages 12 and 13 of our September 13th Joint Chairman's Report, which also very closely tracks with our report submitted on January 31st of this year and reports previously made. As noted in our written response, it's our contention that the state has not lost money. In fact, the cost of the contract with Optum is $5.2 million less than the budgeted amount currently due to withholdings and penalties.
So I find that hard to believe, honestly. I'm looking at a table that was compiled by our legislative audit team that shows over $500 million. These are claims that were improperly denied. These were duplicate payments. These were overpayments. These were uncollected federal funds, denied claims, and then liquidated damage that were not assessed. And you're telling me that the total of that is actually a net positive for the state.
Again, Mr. Chairman, you have our written response.
Could I ask Mr. Hsu, do you agree with that response? You're also telling me that this is not a loss for the state in total?
I don't believe there have been losses. We did advance over $1 billion, as you know, as was discussed by the auditor. We've been working diligently to collect those funds. All but $140 million have been collected. And by the end of this month, those remaining dollars will all be subject to installment payment plans or to claims withholding to repay the entirety of the amount by next summer. As Mr. Yee pointed out, the contract was budgeted and will end up costing the state $5.2 million less than budgeted because we are exacting significant penalties and withholding payment from the company because of all the issues we're discussing today. We have not employed liquidated damages. That's one tool. That's the nuclear option. We retain the right to do so, but that should not be interpreted by the members of these committees that no sanctions or other penalties have been imposed, because they have.
Okay. Well, I find it nonsensical that the department still contends that money was saved out of this entire escapade. It certainly looks like there's been hundreds of millions of dollars that have been lost by the state. And I think the answer that was provided from the department was insufficient and is such a contortion of the truth that it really puts Cirque du Soleil to shame. It's really remarkable that you're twisting the interpretation of the audit in this way. My second question has to do with points that were brought up by the Board of Public Works. When further questioning was made of the secretary, and let me be clear, the secretary was asked to attend this hearing, just as it was asked to attend the hearing previously with the Health and Government Operations Committee. And the secretary has chosen not to appear before either committee. And the secretary, in response to questioning by the Board of Public Works, contended that he was very confident, that is his quote, very confident in the firm's ability to perform. He also said, quote, that a lot of due diligence on this was done. And yet, when we look at the report from the auditors, it looks as though there wasn't a lot of due diligence done at the beginning to determine and decide upon Optum obtaining this contract, when it looks like there were red flags that were identified as part of routine reference checks with other states. It looks like subcontractors, which there were a significant number of subcontractors, were not thoroughly vetted as part of this process. And yet the secretary goes to the Board of Public Works and contends that there was a lot of due diligence, and he was very confident in the ability of Optum to do this. And now we stand 3 years later, looking at least from our perspective, hundreds of millions of dollars, if not $500 million in losses to the state. And how do you, since we can only ask you, since the secretary is not here, contend with the fact that there was a lot of due diligence that was stated up front by the secretary?
Mr. Chairman, I think I need to first issue one clarification. At the time in 2019, Mr. Schrader was not the Secretary of Health at that time. The Secretary of Health was Secretary Neal. With respect to Mr. Schrader, he was the Deputy Secretary for Healthcare Financing and the Medicaid Director of the department. I believe he was also the Chief Operating Officer at that time. With respect to your question about the procurement process, I can maintain, and the department vigorously maintains, that it followed state procurement law, which specifies a competitive procurement process. I'm not a certified procurement officer, but from what I understand from my colleagues in procurement, that competitive procurement process was followed to the letter. Specifically, you had a request for proposals. It was advertised. Proposals were received. I believe at the end of the day, there were 2 solicitations that made it through. Those solicitations were reviewed by an evaluation committee for both technical and financial merits. And then that evaluation committee produced an award recommendation. That award recommendation was discussed by Mr. Schrader and Secretary Neal, and based on the evaluation committee's recommendation, they decided to move forward with the proposed award of the current BASO contract to the current vendor, and that was brought before the Board of Public Works. So again, with respect to the procurement side, we again believe that was done in accordance with state law. At the time, there was a transition to the current Office of State Procurement at the Department of General Services. And I believe that it was brought in under the DBM procurement approval and review process. To your question about the transition, we have been very, I think, forthright, starting even in 2020, when we first started briefing the legislature about this issue in January of 2020. And we've steadily kept all the legislative committees and leadership very well abreast about our progress with respect to the transition. And we have very forthright conversations with the legislative auditors. It is very clear now in hindsight that we did not build enough time for the transition between one vendor and another vendor. That is, I think, without a doubt. And that is why 2 years before the next potential transition, we are having these discussions now. We started having these discussions this time last year with the legislative leadership, and we believe that the best path forward is to get a request for proposals out as soon as possible, have it be as competitive as possible with as many strong solicitations as possible, and then to have these discussions over the course of the next 6 months, and then award to a new vendor or whoever's the winning vendor sometime next year.
Okay. I think, I find it hard to believe that there was a lot of due diligence done in regards to the review of the proposal that was submitted by Optum. You cite the fact that they went through the standard procedures. If that's the case, the standard procedures are insufficient for a review of the contract this size for vendors that were doing this amount of work for the state. Mr. Schrader those were quotes by Mr. Schrader to the Board of Public Works. Those were his exact quotes, that there was a lot of due diligence done and he had a lot of confidence in the review. Clearly, there were mistakes that were made, and this review fell short of being able to ensure that Optum would be able to fulfill the terms of this contract. To your last point, and I'll ask one last question before turning it over to my colleagues here. The period in which we're still with Optum for the next 2 years, they've identified that they will not be submitting a bid for this new proposal that's being put out by the department. So we have a 2-year lame duck period with this current contractor, and yet we're choosing not to pursue liquidated damages. And I find it hard to understand how we're going to ensure that a contractor that has now a 2-year lame duck period with no impetus to hold them responsible for liquidated damages will do the right thing in making sure that our providers are made whole and that there's proper accountability to taxpayers when they haven't done that for the last 3 years. Why is the state choosing not to make taxpayers whole by pursuing these liquidated damages? And who is the person, this is echoing Senator Kramer's earlier line of questioning, who is the individual responsible for making that decision?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With respect to the liquidated damages response, you can see our written response on page 12 of the agency response to the legislative report. Mr. Hook and Mr. Adler have summarized our position, and we believe that, again, imposing liquidated damages at this point is not an effective way in ensuring that the state receives a working product for a mission critical healthcare services system. Again, we believe that at this time, imposing liquidated damages would maximize the chances of litigation, create an adversarial working relationship, and potentially produce further minimum performance by the vendor. With respect to your question as to who, the decision memos have been brought to Secretary Schrader, and he, at the end of the day, has made that decision. And as such, that is the departmental policy. Again, the Maryland Department of Health preserves all rights and remedies available to it under the law.
So despite the fact that our contract with Optum has the option to pursue liquidated damages, and from, I think, everyone's perspective, Optum has not performed to expectations, the department is choosing not to pursue liquidated damages. And I think it sends the wrong message to contractors that work with the state. It makes a laughingstock of our contracting process if we enter into contracts with vendors who are unable to deliver and yet do not pursue damages when those contractors are costing the state millions of dollars. And so, I think this is an example of what's broken with our state procurement process. And there have been a lot of examples out of the Department of Health. Let me stop there, and I saw Delegate Resnick's hand first, followed by Delegate Pendergrass, and then Delegate Arndt. Go ahead, Delegate Resnick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will echo before I ask my question what the chairman said about the precedent that we are setting from a procurement point of view. That if we have an ongoing contract and a contractor has failed to perform, we worry about pursuing any kind of legal action or recourse against that contractor because we feel that they might perform less, even more going forward. It is unconscionable to think that it is not something our federal partners ever do when it comes to government contracting, and it is not a precedent we should be setting at the state level. My question, Mr. Yee, you had mentioned that part of the problem, or a large scale part of this problem, precipitated with the fact there was not enough run-up transition between the previous contractor and the current one. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
If I recall correctly, when the initial problems began, when we noticed that there would be, there were already failures on the part of Optum during the budget hearings for your department in 2020, you stated, and that was collaborated by other folks who were testifying, that the problem stemmed from the fact that the previous contractor, Beacon, refused to turn over appropriate documentation, and so Optum had to start from beginning, which does not jive with what you are saying now about the fact that there just wasn't enough a run-up. Are you still contending that Beacon refused to turn over appropriate documentation to the department and to Optum?
Yes, sir. And if I may explain, Delegate Resnick, there are two pathways. The first is, I think, the hoped for solution, which, as we now know, did not occur, which was that Beacon and Optum would have cooperated and ensured a smooth transition together. That did not happen. The second pathway was that Optum had enough time to produce their, effectively speaking, new computer claims management system. As we now know, that did not happen as well. It took them at the end of the day until August of 2020.
So when you have a contract of this nature, who owns the data?
That is one of the interesting questions, Delegate. At the time, Beacon held the claims information. Under the current contract, Optum holds it within their system as well. With the next RFP, we are attempting to remedy that.
That is not my question. Under the Beacon contract, who owned the data about claimants? The claims were made to the state through Beacon. The state paid it out through matching funds from the federal government. My experience as a federal government contracts specialist says that when the government is paying the money, the government owns the data. So are you claiming that Beacon breached its contract and breached federal law by refusing to turn over claims data?
Delegate, again, I am an attorney, but I'm not authorized to speak as an attorney for the department. I'll certainly take your question back, consult with my colleagues, and we'll respond to you in writing.
And would Beacon's failure to turn over data have any impact on their bid should they bid again on the new RFP?
Sir, I don't know. That would be speculation. We have not put out an RFP yet, although we have publicly stated that we want to get an RFP out as soon as possible. And then certainly we would assume that the evaluation committee would fairly evaluate all solicitations received in a manner consistent with state law.
I will say, if Beacon contends that your statements are in any way detrimental to their ability to get a new contract, I'm sure you will be hearing from them. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Delegate Resnick. Next, we'll go to Delegate Pendergrass.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure who to ask this question of, but I'm sitting here being very concerned and being reminded as we talk about mental health benefits of the classic definition of insanity, and that's doing the same thing again and again and expecting a different result. We are now suggesting, I hear Mr. Yee suggesting that we will be having the Department of Health create a contract or an RFP for a contract as they did prior before the end of the year, since they will no longer be in charge of things at the end of the year. So we're suggesting that the people who are completely incompetent at not only doing the RFP and doing the oversight are now going to be the people who are doing the RFP, and clearly they're not going to be the people choosing the vendor because they will not be in that position. This will not happen by the decision could not possibly happen by the end of the year. I am concerned that we go forward with anything with this department since I have no confidence in the work that they have done. Is there anyone either from the auditors or a chairman who is wiser than I or Mr. Yee who can answer the questions that I'm posing?
If I may, I don't want to lose sight of the response to finding one from the department, and this might address some of your concerns, Delegate. And I'm just going to read it verbatim. And it says, since the ASO contract was awarded in 2019, MDH has made significant changes that will enhance all future procurements and will ensure better and more rigorous pre-award review, especially of contractor proposed technology. Chief among these changes is the creation of the Office of Contract Management and Procurement, which has an enhanced role in the review and approval of contract bids. MDH implemented a new IT project and fiscal management policy in August of 2022. Now, I don't know how good this is going to be, but this is what we were looking for. Our point was we did not contend they did not comply with state procurement regulations. And I would agree with the Assistant Secretary. The issue was how comprehensive were the actions they took in that process. And this response at least does agree with our finding and does indicate a movement forward. Now, I don't know if that's going to ensure that the next contract will be awarded properly or not, but I just wanted to acknowledge the fact that they did agree it wasn't as rigorous as it should have been, and they pledged to make it better going forward. I don't know if that addresses your question or not, but I didn't want to lose sight of that fact. That's all.
It's helpful. The problem is that we think that we've lost $500 million on this, and they say we haven't lost anything. So it's really hard for me to assess their judgment. It's true that we, as the Health and Government Operations Committee, had oversight with the IT contracting issues. And we hope that things are going to go better than they have gone in the past. I just want to mention one more thing. Optum is a company, many of you will not recall, was the company that rebuilt our health benefit exchange when it crashed many years ago, the first year that we implemented it. So I feel that Optum has not done a good job on this, but I also know that when you write an RFP, when you're working with a vendor to do computer things, if you don't ask the right questions, if you don't give them the things that you know are the needs that you have, then they give you a contract that doesn't do what you, a program that doesn't do what you want them to do. I am very concerned still. I appreciate Mr. Hook's answer. That was a very good answer. But I'm still very concerned about us moving forward with something that has been developed by people who don't seem to know what they're doing. Thank you very much.
Sure. It looks like Mr. Yee would like to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Madam Chairman Emeritus, for your comments and question. First, we do agree with, and we thank Mr. Hook for his comments. With procurement, we have been steadily focused on rebuilding our department's procurement process over the past 2 years. We have been, again, privileged to have the assistance of the Office of State Procurement and their guidance in revamping our systems. Under our new director, Mr. Beecham, we have made light years of progress in improving our department's processes. With respect to the Chairman Emeritus question, our goal with this new RFP is to create as many options as possible for both the department and the next administration. I believe personally that it would be doing a grave disservice to the over 20 professionals who have been working on this new RFP for the over past 18 months with the Chairman Emeritus comments. Again, these are professionals who are not political. Their job is to try to take the lessons learned from the past RFP and the previous RFPs and to make the best RFP that we can. Inevitably, there will be new problems, but our commitment is to work through them.
Okay. Delegate Pendergrass, any further questions along those lines?
No, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I have no further questions.
Okay, one follow-up and then Delegate Arntz. You cite the fact that there have been, Mr. Yee, have been, I guess, improvements that have been undertaken by the department to try to improve the procurement process that is the department is going through, and that these were improvements that have been put in place over the last few years, I guess, since the Optum contract had been signed. However, the department under this administration has been in place for many, many years. And so why has it taken this long to now begin to put in place some of these improvements when you had plenty of time many years ago, even before the Optum contract was initially agreed to engage in these improvements with the contracts office?
The short answer, Mr. Chairman, is we are always finding out new problems. We're a very large and complex bureaucracy, as I think everyone on the committees understand and know, and we are always trying to improve.
Okay, well, I find it suspicious that the improvements now are suddenly being made in this time frame after all of the controversy that's now come from this contract specifically, and whether processes were properly complied with or not, there were a lot of shortcomings in the review of this contract.
Mr. Chairman, we would be the last to disagree. Again, with a lot of assistance with our colleagues at the Office of Legislative Auditors, if when they raise an issue, we try to fix it. And I think that's been both Secretary Neal and Secretary Schrader's policy. Our number one priority is audit compliance.
Delegate Arntz?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My comments based on the last two audits. It seems to me that we are putting the auditors in a position where they make all these comments and they make the recommendations, and then we take them out of the picture and then we try to ask the questions. When you were asking your questions and you weren't getting the answer you were looking for, sir, I thought possibly that's he said, she said, but we're getting involved in here and we're not giving the auditors a chance to help rebuke what you were asking and say that no, that those things haven't been done. Those are the people that are the experts on this, that have gone back and done this work that we are questioning at this point. The other point I'll just bring back up and I'll be done, because these are just general comments. We're now in two audits where we're not getting the answers we are asking that we think we should be getting. And I'm just a little concerned that that the power of the Joint Audit Committee, we should have some kind of mechanism to ensure that our questions get answered and get answered to the degree that we're asking them. I know we can sit back and say, we'll get an answer tomorrow, we'll get an answer this day, but we've been in other hearings where we hear somebody say they're going to get an answer and we never get the answer. I think it's important because we're dealing with a lot of money here, a lot of taxpayer dollars, that I don't know, that we find a mechanism to sit back and get the results that we're looking for in these hearings. I know based on the last two audits, I'm not exactly satisfied with what I've heard based on what I've read that are the problems. Isn't that so? I'll say so. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you. I agree. Any comments from the audit team?
Senator, if I may, I'd like to point to the department's response to finding one that dealt with the procurement. And I can't help but notice that their estimated completion date for the recommendation that they do a comprehensive review of some contractors, the estimated completion date is 12/31/2024, which would be, based on what we just heard, 2 years after the RFP was put out.
So just to be clear on that, you're saying that the estimated date of completion for the improvements that they've been citing is not until the end of 2024, well after the next RFP will be decided?
I'm just reading their response, which is in the back of our audit report. In response to recommendation 1A, they say they agree. The estimated completion date is 12/31/2024.
That's actually the end of the Optum contract. Period. So, well, thank you for bringing that up, Mr. Tan. And I think, does the department have a response on this? If the department is contending that you're putting in place all these improvements to elevate your contract and procurement process, and now we're finding that it's not actually going to be in place until the end of 2024, that brings a huge level of concern with the next RFP that's being put out there.
Mr. Chairman, I'll be happy to take that. If you look at our response in recommendation 1A, the goal of the department is to confer and coordinate with the Department of General Services and its Office of State Procurement on developing and implementing a contract administration and management process, as well as any attendant interim departmental policies by the end of this year, December 31st, 2022. And it goes on further. With respect to your observation, and I apologize, I missed the auditor's last name. Yes, the December 31st, 2024 estimated completion date does refer to the end of the current BASO vendor.
So just to be clear, the improvement that you cite won't actually be completed until the same time as when the contract with Optum ceases, and nearly 2 years after the RFP has been put out to determine the next vendor coming in.
No, Mr. Chairman. As I just stated, our goal is to develop and implement a contract administration and management process, as well as any attendant interim departmental policies by December 31st, 2022.
Okay.
If I may try to clarify,
Go ahead, Mr. Hook.
I think we're kind of talking like I think the completion date will simply be the date that all of these new processes, many of which are in place now, will finally be have had their effect with the new ASO contract. So they are developing new policies and procedures now. Some are already in place. Others will be in place by December, and these new policies and procedures will then be applied for the next ASO procurement, which will have the effective date of December 31st, 2024. So you'll see evidence of these new procedures in the new ASO procurement. I don't want to put words in the department's mouth, but I think that's what we're saying here, is that they are actually making improvements now. Some are still going to be made, but the effect of all these changes, present and future, will be taken into account for the new ASO procurement.
I'm always happy to take eloquence lessons from you, Mr. Hook. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hook. I see Senator Kagan has a question.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I am in the car, and so I apologize for that. I'm in St. Mary's County, actually. I just want to just pipe in and commend all the really thoughtful questions from you, Mr. Chair, from Chair Emeritus Pendergast, from Senator Kramer, Delegate Aronson, Delegate Resnick. And this is obvious, but I just want to say it anyway. The commitments that we've gotten from some of these folks to get us answers today, right away, or tomorrow, is insufficient. This is a public process, and this is a hearing that advocates, that clients, that colleagues, and that the press can be watching. And a letter, a follow-up, no matter how well-intentioned and how comprehensive, really does not have that kind of visibility. And so, Mr. Chair, Co-Chair Chang, congratulations. I don't know if there's a way that we might be able to amplify the responses that we get, but there's a lot of problematic and worrisome things that we've learned in this hearing. And so I want to commend everyone for follow-up is critical, and sharing that information. The last thing I just want to mention is that we're in an election year, and I just want to be clear that both Republicans and Democrats have expressed their concerns about the waste of taxpayer money, and sometimes stereotypes don't have it that way. But I think we all want to make sure the government works well. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you, Senator Kagan. Other questions from members of the committee? I have a question for the department, because we've actually been receiving a lot of emails from concerned providers that feel like they still have not been made whole, that there are funds that are being debited from their checking accounts, and that it's forced by Optum, and that some of these providers are now, because of the money that Optum is pulling back from them, aren't sure if they can continue to provide care anymore. I'm looking at an email from a behavioral health provider down in Southern Maryland who has reached out to us because they are having a problem dealing with Optum's reconciliation process, where tens of thousands of dollars are being pulled out of the provider and being pulled back into Optum. And when the provider contends that some of these payments were actually proper, they're not getting a response from Optum. And this provider, for example, in Southern Maryland, believes that if this is not resolved, they would have to shut their doors, probably in January. And so, you know, obviously we're still facing the after effects of the pandemic. There are a lot of life stressors and anxiety amongst the general public. The need for behavioral health has increased. And at the same time, our behavioral health providers are being squeezed out because of incompetence at the vendor and poor oversight at the department. Where should these concerns be directed to, and can you commit to resolving these concerns so our behavioral health providers don't close their doors at a critical time?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I think pretty much every member of this committee knows, and as your office knows, any constituent provider with a complaint is welcome to contact and forward their email to me or Steve Shu. My email is Webster, like the dictionary, period, Y as in Yankee, E as in Echo, at maryland.gov. Mr. Chairman, your office has been in constant contact with my inbox, my colleagues, on all sorts of constituent service issues. And we are happy to work with any constituent provider and their reconciliation manager on a one-on-one basis to resolve items if possible. With respect to where we are now, as you may know, sir, in the fiscal year 23 budget, the final agreed upon budget after the supplementals, et cetera, there is provision made by the General Assembly for up to $25,000 forgiveness for providers that agree on a final recoupment amount. And so for providers that have not been responsive, have not responded to over 2 years of outreach, we encourage them to please reach out to us. There is still time. We're happy to talk to them. Please, they can reach out to us by email, by phone, or anything else. And I'm happy to give everyone my cell phone too. And it's, let me give it to you guys. It's 301-775-1996. It's a personal cell. My wife will get rather angry at me if someone calls late at night, but we pick up.
Okay. Well, we've been hearing from a lot of providers, because I'm looking at another letter as well, of a provider that continues to contend that Optum is not responsive in the claims information that they're providing, and that they have reached out to Optum and are receiving inaccurate information or poor correspondence. The vendor is trying to also seek funding from this provider as well, but not able to provide documentation why this funding is being pulled back. And the vendor believes that a large chunk of this is accurate payment, but the provider believes this is accurate payment for services they've rendered, and Optum is not able to provide any documentation to justify them pulling funds back out of the provider. This story seems to be continuing with many providers that have reached out. These are not isolated reports. And so I think there needs to be a better systematic review of how Optum is engaging in their communication and also documentation with these providers. We're hearing, and I think many of us members of this committee and members of the legislature are hearing and continuing to hear from providers that still have this problem with Optum, and they're not getting any resolution to this. And as was cited by this Southern Maryland behavioral health provider, many of them could end up very well closing the doors because of the poor communication and documentation by Optum and the unresponsiveness of the state. So I would encourage you to make sure that Optum improves this communication or makes these providers whole so that we don't lose and continue to lose behavioral health providers at a critical time.
Mr. Chairman, we certainly will always work with Optum to improve their customer service. As for the state, again, we encourage any member of this committee or any member of the General Assembly or any constituent provider to please reach out and contact us. We rigorously track all constituent inquiries in conformance with the governor's customer service promise. And again, if you can get us those two providers' information, we'll be happy to look into it, sir. We've certainly found out that it's a very much provider by provider basis at this point.
Okay. Well, I've had no confidence with Optum's ability to respond up to this point. So I'm not incredibly confident that they will be able to resolve these issues too. And that leaves many of our providers in a very difficult spot. I think it also, further justifies the need to be able to pursue these liquidated damages, but I've made that point earlier already. Any further questions from the committee? All right, seeing no further questions from the committee, I think we will need a motion from the committee to move into closed session to discuss the cybersecurity findings.
Mr. Chairman, move to closed session under subsection 3305B15 for general provisions article.
Okay. Committee staff, do we need a vote on this?
Yes, if we could take a vote, but I think you need a second.
Second the motion.
Okay, so can we just do this by affirmation? All those in,
yes,
all those in favor, say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed to move into closed session? Okay.
Okay.
So I think we need to read a legal statement, which is
Yeah,
this meeting will
thank
be
you.
closed.
Thank you,
Go
Mr.
ahead.
Chairman. If we could move into these closed session under article, the general provision article of subsection 3305 B15, it's to discuss cybersecurity issues that may constitute a risk to security assessments or deployments related to information resources, technology, and network security information, among other things. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Thank you, Chairman Chang. We'll move into closed session. Once we exit closed session, we will come back onto the live.
Yeah. And the way that it will work, everybody, is I'm just going to open up a breakout room and you'll see a message that will move you into the closed session room. So I'm going to go ahead and open that. And if you have any issues, please send me a message on the chat.
Jane, I assume we have everyone back from the
Yep.
closed session?
Yeah,
Okay.
you're back now.
All right. I think seeing no further questions for the department, I think we will let them step away at this time. I think, from my perspective, there have been a lot of important questions that I hope the department will continue to look into and pursue. But I am concerned about the findings that continue to carry forward. And unfortunately, it's probably going to be to the next administration to clean this up. So with that, we're going to wrap up the Department of Health audit, and we will move to the summary of reports issued and recommended committee actions with Mr. Hook in the Office of Legislative Audit.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will try to be quick. OLA's final presentation is the customary summary of audit reports issued since the last committee hearing and recommended actions for select reports. As noted on page 1 of the handout, OLA issued 54 audit reports during the period from November 16th, 2021 to October 31st, 2022, with the detail list found on pages 2 and 3. On page 1 is a table summarizing OLA recommendations for action. 3 reports are recommended for committee hearing, 2 of which were heard today. Perhaps the most significant news to be gathered from this document is the 3rd named report, Maryland Department of Labor, Division of Unemployment Insurance, Part 1. At the December committee meeting, with the committee's concurrence, OLA would like to present the results of our audits of the Division of Unemployment Insurance. As noted in the Part 1 report, OLA broke DUI, or Department, Division of Unemployment Insurance, into 2 separate audits covering unemployment insurance and unemployment benefits. In addition to the reports recommended for hearings, we are also recommending 4 audit reports for issuance of a letter of concern from the committee. As noted on page 4 of the handout, a letter serves to reinforce the importance of implementing OLA recommended corrective action to agencies audited where the implementation of such actions have not yet been finalized. OLA has previously provided the committee members with a confidential document summarizing some of the audit-related issues for each of the 4 agencies that served as the basis for OLA's recommended action. That concludes my presentation.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hook. Do we need to take a vote on that, or is that simply a report to us as the committee?
That's simply a report, Mr.
Simply a
Chair.
report. Okay. Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Hook on that? Okay. That is the last agenda item for today. For closing remarks, I'll turn to Co-Chair Chang to see if he has any remarks he would like to make.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, everyone, for being part of this hearing today. And obviously, there's a lot of questions that we still need answers to in the repeat findings. So hopefully we'll be able to get those addressed. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Co-Chair Chang. I also want to thank the audit team. I know Greg, Mr. Hook, and your team have done a lot of work through these audits, and it's really to your credit and your team's credit for the tremendous work that you do and recommendations you provide to us. This has been really helpful, and I think it makes our legislature all the better for the work that you put in. So thank you. I also want to just publicly acknowledge and thank Chair Emeritus Pendergrass for her work in leading the Health and Government Operations Committee for many, many years. Been a great mentor and colleague here in Howard County. We'll certainly miss you as you leave the legislature and retire, but appreciate all of your work through the years as well. And also want to thank our colleagues from the House Health and Government Operations Committee and also the House Appropriations Committee who joined us for this hearing today. Seeing no further comments or questions, I think we can entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
And second. All right. Thank you all.